My name is Catherine Elizabeth Vance, though most people in my life have called me Cat. For as long as I can remember, I was born in a town called Fairview in the rolling hills of southern Ohio, a place where front porches were for waving to neighbors. And the most significant event of the week was the gathering of families in wooden pews on Sunday morning. I was the quieter middle daughter between two louder brothers. My refuge was found in books, and in the kitchen beside my grandmother, who taught me that baking was not just measurement, but a language of love measured in cups of sugar and pinches of salt. I met Michael Andrew Roberts during my sophomore year at the University of Cincinnati. I was studying English literature, lost in worlds of Bronte and Austen, and he was a practical, focused business major with a 5-year plan that he could recite with convincing certainty. He pursued me with a gentle persistence that felt like safety. He remembered my favorite flower, the lily of the valley. He opened car doors. His handwriting was neat and orderly on the birthday cards. He never forgot we married 2 years after graduation in the same stone chapel, where my parents had exchanged vows, my grandmother's lace veil softening my vision of the crowded pews. The reception was under a striped tent, on my parents' lawn, fireflies winking in the June twilight like 1,000 tiny blessings. It felt less like a beginning and more like a seamless, inevitable continuation of a story already written in the stars. We bought a colonial-style house in a suburb with excellent schools, a house with black shutters, and a wide, welcoming porch. We painted the nursery a soft yellow for Liam, who arrived with a head of dark hair and serious eyes that seemed to know secrets. 18 months later, Sophia came with a cry that was somehow musical and a smile that could disarm the deepest worry. Our lives became a beautiful, exhausting orbit around soccer practices and pediatrician appointments, parent-teacher conferences, and bedtime stories of brave little engines who thought they could. Michael climbed the corporate ladder, his suits growing more expensive, his briefcase heavier. With responsibilities, I curated our home. I became the architect of birthday magic, the planner of perfect holidays, the glue that held our bustling, beautiful world together. I prided myself on the smooth surface of our lives, the polished floors, the coordinated family photos, the absence of visible conflict. We were a portrait of American success. The first Fisher was so small I mistook it for a shadow. He stopped laughing at my jokes, not in a cruel way, but in an absent way, as if the sound of my voice had become background noise like the hum of the refrigerator. He began traveling more for work, the destinations blurring into a list of cities I had never seen. He would return with gifts hastily chosen from airport terminals, scarves in colors I never wore, perfumes that smelled of someone else's, longing the distance between us and our king. Sized bed could have fit a third person, a cold expanse of Egyptian cotton. We stopped talking about dreams and started discussing logistics. The gutter needed cleaning, the car needed an oil change. I told myself this was the natural evolution of marriage, the passionate flame banked into comfortable embers. I told myself I should be grateful for the warmth of the embers. I convinced myself my loneliness was a personal failure, a lack of gratitude for the good man and the beautiful children and the lovely home. I tried desperately to bridge the gap. I planned a surprise weekend getaway to a bed and breakfast we had loved. I bought lingerie that made me feel awkward and unfamiliar. I read books on rekindling romance and left them strategically on his nightstand. He would smile, a thin, stretched smile, and say he was tired. Work was demanding. He had a big presentation. My efforts felt like pebbles thrown into a deep dark. Well, I heard no splash, only a hollow, echoing silence. I began to shrink, to make myself smaller, quieter, less needy. I believed if I could just be perfect, the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect keeper of the home, he would turn back toward me, and the light would return to his eyes. The revelation of the affair was not cinematic. There was no discovered lipstick on a collar, no damning hotel receipt. It was a Saturday morning. The children were watching cartoons. The smell of pancakes hung in the air. Michael was in the shower. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter with a text, the preview visible on the screen. It was not from a name I recognized. The message itself was mundane, something about a meeting time. But it was followed by a string of heart emojis, a pink one, a red one, a blowing kiss. A chill started in the center of my chest and radiated outwards to my fingertips, which had gone numb. I stood there frozen, holding a spatula over the griddle until the batter burned black. The sound of the shower stopped. I placed the spatula down carefully, my movements precise and robotic. When he emerged dressed in jeans and a towel around his shoulders, I simply held out his phone, my hand, steady my voice, a stranger's calm. Who is this? The color drained from his face. He did not bluster or deny. He looked at me with an expression of profound weariness. And something else, relief. It had been going on for 8 months. She was a colleague from the Denver office. It was serious. He was sorry for the hurt. But he could not continue living this lie, this pretense of a life that was suffocating him. The words fell like stones, each one landing with a final thud on the burnt pancakes and the sunny kitchen and the last remnants of my carefully constructed world. What followed was a descent into a kind of gray nothingness. The initial raw screaming pain was almost a relief. It was feeling something. But then the lawyers came, and the grayness set in. Divorce in our state was a matter of division, a mathematical unraveling of a life. We sat in a room that smelled of lemon polish and anxiety, with attorneys who spoke of petitions and equitable distribution and parenting plans. We were not people. We were assets and liabilities. My grief had no place here, only my signature. We divided our books, our music collection, the good silver from our wedding. I took the ceramic bowl Liam made in 2nd grade. He took the signed baseball from a game we went to early in our marriage. The house, the home I had nurtured, was sold to a young family who would paint over the pencil marks on the doorway where we measured the children's growth. The final court date was on a Tuesday in November. The trees were skeletal against a bleak sky. The judge, a woman with kind eyes and a tired mouth, used words like dissolved and terminated the sound of her gavel. Was a period at the end of a 20-year sentence. I walked out of the courthouse into the biting wind. Michael nodded to me a tight, awkward motion and walked away in the opposite direction. I sat in my car, the engine off, watching my breath fog the window. I waited for the tears to come, but I was a dry well. I felt carved out, hollowed, a museum of a life that was now closed to the public. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with beige carpets that showed every stain and walls so thin I could hear my neighbor's television laugh track the silence in my own space. However, was deafening. It was a thick, heavy silence that pressed on my eardrums at 3 a.m. It was in this silence that the voices came. You are a failure. No one will ever love you again. You have doomed your children. You are used goods, broken merchandise. The shame was visceral, a hot, constant flush on my skin. I avoided grocery stores at busy times, terrified of seeing someone from my old life. I could see the pity in their eyes, the unasked questions. I stopped returning phone calls from friends whose lives were still intact, whose families were whole. Their happiness felt like a personal rebuke. My children were my anchor and my deepest source of pain. Liam, 9 years old, became angry, sullen. He broke toys. He fought at school. He told me he hated me in a voice shaking with tears. He did not understand. Sophia, 7, became my shadow, silent and clingy, afraid to let me out of her sight at night. She would crawl into my bed, her small body trembling. We were 3 ghosts haunting the new, unfamiliar rooms of our apartment, going through the motions of a life. I made sandwiches with the crusts cut off, helped with math homework. I signed permission slips. But inside, I was a ship adrift in a starless sea with no compass and no land in sight. But before we continue, I want to extend a very specially invitation to you. Subscribe the channel and leave a like. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories, and comment down below which city you are watching us from right now. Let's continue. The transformation did not begin with a bang, but with a whisper, a small act of defiance against the nothingness. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the kind of gray that seeps into your bones. Sophia was coloring at our cheap IKEA table, her brow furrowed in concentration. Mommy, she said, holding up a sheet of paper. This is you. I took it, expecting a stick figure with a triangle dress. But she had drawn a woman. The body was a simple oval, but the head was crowned with a massive, chaotic scribble of brown and black and blue crayon. It was fierce and wild. What is that on my head, sweetie? I asked, my voice tired. She looked at me, her eyes clear and certain. It is your crown, Mommy. But it is made of thunder because you are strong like a storm. I stared at that drawing, at the powerful, turbulent energy she saw emanating from me. She did not see a broken thing. She saw a force of nature. That night, after the children were asleep, I looked at the drawing taped to the refrigerator. I looked at the thunder crown. I made a decision. I would do one thing tomorrow, just one thing that was not about survival. I would not think about healing or happiness. Those concepts were galaxies away. I would simply take one action that felt like a step out of the quicksand. The next morning, after drop-off, I drove past my apartment and kept going. I drove to a park I had never visited. I sat on a cold metal bench overlooking a duck pond, and I took out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I misdialed twice. I finally called the number for a therapist, a woman named Dr. Aisha Jones, whose biography mentioned a specialty in life transitions, and mindfulness. Making that appointment was the hardest, bravest thing I had done in years. It felt like throwing a rope into the darkness and hoping something solid was there to catch it. Therapy was not what I expected. Dr. Aisha was a calm presence with eyes that held both warmth and unflinching truth. Our first sessions were me weeping incoherently, snotty tissues piling up in my lap. She listened, she waited, then she began to ask questions that dismantled my world. Catherine, when did you stop being Kat? When did your wants and needs become negotiable or invisible? Why do you equate love with perfection? Why do you believe your value is tied to your ability to maintain a peaceful facade? We began the slow, excruciating work of archaeology, digging through the layers of who I had been before I was Mike's wife, the girl who loved poetry and hated raspberries, the young woman who dreamed of writing a novel. We excavated my passions, my fears, the boundaries I had never learned to set. It was painful labor, like resetting a bone that had healed wrong. Concurrently, I knew my body was holding all the trauma, the clenching in my jaw, the permanent knot between my shoulders, the shallow breath of constant anxiety. A friend from my old life mentioned a yoga class at the local community center. I went filled with self-consciousness in my old college t-shirt and sweatpants. The studio was warm, smelled of sandalwood. And after the instructor, Alina, had a voice like honey and velvet. She spoke not of poses, but of intentions of meeting yourself where you are on my mat. In the back row during a pose called Child's Pose, where you curl into yourself, I finally wept the silent, shaking tears I had been withholding for months. No one looked, no one judged. I was just another woman breathing through her pain in a room full of people doing the same. That hour became my sanctuary, my weekly reboot. The practical realities were a looming mountain of terror. I had not earned a paycheck in over a decade. My resume was a desert of blank space. After my college graduation, the alimony and child support were a lifeline, but they felt like a tether to a past. I despised a constant reminder of my dependency. Panic attacks became a familiar foe. They would strike in the cereal aisle, or while driving, a sudden tsunami of dizziness and dread that I was going to drown. I took a part-time job shelving books at the public library, the quiet order, the Dewey Decimal System. The smell of old paper and polished shelves was a balm to my chaotic mind. There was a right place for every book, a system, a logic. It soothed me. It was in the library that the first true spark of an idea ignited. I was reshelving in the cooking section. A book fell open to a page of a fantastical wedding cake, shaped like a cascade of sugar roses. A memory surfaced of Liam's 5th birthday, a pirate ship cake. I had stayed up until 2 a.m. crafting sails from fondant, the joy on his face. The next day, Sophia had requested a fairy forest cake with edible moss and meringue mushrooms. The compliments from other parents had been effusive. You should do this professionally, Kat. I had always laughed it off, a hobby, nothing more. But standing there in the silent library, a thought whispered, what if? That weekend, I baked a simple vanilla bean cake with raspberry filling and Swiss buttercream. I brought it to a friend's gathering, not saying it was mine. I placed it on the table and watched from across the room. People raved, who made this? Where did you get this? The pleasure I felt was sharp and clean, different from the muted satisfaction of a clean house. It was pride. My friend cornered me later, her fork still in hand. Kat, that was you, wasn't it? I will pay you to make my mother's birthday cake next week. You name the price. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook. The first page I wrote, Cakes by Kat. It was a declaration, a tiny flag planted in the soil of my future. The business began in the cramped confines of my apartment kitchen. Flour dusted every surface, bowls piled in the sink. My children became expert taste testers. My first official paid order was for a retirement cake shaped like a golf bag. It was lopsided. The golf clubs looked more like bizarre carrots. But the client was kind and paid me $80. I framed the check. It was not just money, it was evidence I could create something of value out of thin air and sugar and my own 2 hands. Meanwhile, on my barren apartment balcony, I planted the morning glory seeds my mother had sent. The packet sat on my windowsill for weeks, a symbol of a hope I did not feel. Finally, one afternoon, with Sophia helping, I filled a pot with soil, and we poked the tiny dark seeds into the dirt. We watered them every day. Sophia would check first thing in the morning. Weeks passed, nothing. I told her maybe the soil was bad, maybe We did it wrong then one morning. A tiny brave green shoot had pushed through the dark earth. It was the most courageous thing I had ever seen. That fragile tendril felt like a personal covenant, a promise that life could emerge from dormancy. My therapy sessions grew more challenging. Dr. Aisha pushed me to sit with anger, an emotion I had been taught was unbecoming in a good woman. I had skipped over anger straight to sadness and shame. But the anger was there, a deep, hot river of it. Anger at Michael for his betrayal, for his lies, for making me feel invisible. Anger at myself, for allowing it, for losing myself. We did exercises where I wrote letters I would never send. I screamed into pillows. I allowed myself to feel the fiery injustice of it all, and in that process, a space cleared inside me. The anger did not burn me up. It burned away the dead brush of old narratives. The children's pain was a mirror I could not look away from. Liam's anger at school resulted in a meeting with the principal. I sat there feeling like a failed parent. But instead of crumbling, I listened. I advocated for him. We found him a mentor, a kind man who ran a woodworking shop who taught him to channel his fury into shaping. Would Sophia began seeing a play therapist who helped her give words to her fears. We had family sessions where we learned to speak our new language of hurt and hope. I apologized to them, not for the divorce, but for my absence during my gray period. I told them Mommy was learning how to be brave again. And sometimes she would get it wrong. They saw me cry. They saw me take deep breaths. They saw me try. And slowly, tentatively, our trio began to sink again, not as a broken family, but as a resilient little unit. After a year of baking in the apartment, violating several tenants' association rules, I knew I needed a real space. I had saved every cake dollar. I had a small business loan application that terrified me. I drove around for weeks looking at vacant storefronts. Then I sought a narrow space on a side street. Downtown, the windows were grimy, the sign was faded. But the rent was manageable. And the light in the front was beautiful. The back kitchen was a disaster, but it had space. I signed the lease with signature that looked like someone else's. The renovation was my baptism by fire. I learned to use a power sander, stripping layers of old paint. From the floor, I painted the walls a soft, buttery yellow. I installed display shelves with the help of a kind neighbor. I worked late into the night after putting the kids to bed, my body aching, my hands rough, but my spirit lighter than it had been in years. The night before the opening, I slept on a cot in the kitchen, surrounded by the smell of fresh paint and possibility. The grand opening of the Rising Cake Bakery was a symphony of chaos and joy. My parents were there, my mother crying discreetly into a handkerchief. Friends from every chapter of my life came, former neighbors, library colleagues, the parents from my children's school. Alina from my yoga class brought her whole family. Liam and Sophia, wearing matching aprons, proudly handed out samples of chocolate chip cookies and mini cupcakes. I looked around at the crowd, at the chatter, and the laughter, at the sunlight streaming through my clean windows onto my yellow walls, and I felt a surge of a feeling so profound it stole my breath. It was not just pride, it was ownership. This was mine. I had built this not from a place of privilege or luck, but from a place of sheer stubborn will, from the shattered pieces of a life I thought had ended. The business was not an instant roaring success, but it grew steadily. Word of mouth is a powerful force for a baker with a compelling backstory. I became known not just for my elaborate wedding cakes, which I learned to craft with precision, but for my empathy, for listening to a bride's nervous chatter or a son's stories about his retiring father. My cakes tasted of quality, but they also, I was told, felt like love. My favorite orders were for the small celebrations, the promotions, the adoptions, the I survived. My first chemotherapy cake, I cried with clients in my kitchen, forging connections that were about more than butter and sugar. Healing, as Dr. Aisha often reminded me, is not a destination, but a dance. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. There were still landmines. The first time I saw Michael with his new wife at a school concert, my stomach dropped through the floor. She was pretty younger, her hand resting possessively on his arm. A cold sweat broke out on my neck. But I looked at my children on stage, Liam searching the crowd for me, and finding my face, Sophia giving me a tiny wave. I took a deep breath, the kind Alina taught me. Yoga, and I smiled at them. I did not look back at Michael. The trigger lost its power. Loneliness was a more persistent visitor. There were nights the silence of my own bed was a vast echoing canyon. I tried dating, entering the bizarre world of apps, where people were reduced to curated photos and witty bios. It was disastrous and hilarious in equal measure. I went on dates with men who talked only about their ex-wives, or their cryptocurrency portfolios. I went on a date with a perfectly nice man who spent the entire dinner explaining the intricate plot of a superhero movie. I realized I was not ready. I was still learning to be my own best company. I invested in friendships, cultivating a circle of women who were also navigating their own transformations. We were divorced women, widowed women, never married women, artists and accountants and teachers. We met for wine on my bakery. Closed Mondays. We celebrated each other's victories, small and large. We held space for each other's grief. Without trying to fix it, this sisterhood became my scaffolding. 5 years bloomed and faded. The maple tree outside my bakery grew taller. My children grew. Liam at 14 was all elbows and deep voice. And a surprising tenderness he revealed when teaching his sister how to ride a bike. Sophia at 12 was becoming her own person, fiercely independent with a sly sense of humor. My bakery had a loyal following. I had hired 2 part-time employees, students from the local culinary school, who called me Ms. Cat and asked for my advice. Then came the afternoon that tested the mettle of all my hard-won peace. I was in the back kitchen up to my elbows in dark chocolate ganache for a wedding cake when the bell on the front door jingled. I heard one of my employees greet someone. A moment later, she poked her head into the kitchen. "There is a gentleman here to see you, Cat." I wiped my hands on my apron, streaked with flour and cocoa, and walked out. He stood with his back to me, looking at the display case of cupcakes and tarts, but I knew the slope of his shoulders. The way his hair curled at the nape of his neck. Michael, he turned, and the years were written on his face lines. I did not know grooves of stress, or perhaps unhappiness. He was thinner, his eyes, the same hazel that had once captivated me, looked tired. "Cat," he said, his voice was the same, and yet completely foreign to me. He had come to pick up the kids for the weekend. They were running late at Sophia's robotics club. He had seen the bakery sign and decided to come in. "Can I?" He gestured vaguely at the coffee pot by a coffee. "Of course," I said, my voice thankfully steady. I moved behind the counter, the familiar territory giving me strength. I poured him a cup of the dark roast. I kept for myself, the strong kind. He took it black. Just as he always had, he did not sit, just stood there holding the mug, looking around at the bakery, at the vibrant local art on my walls, at the chalkboard menu, in my handwriting, at the thriving spider plant on the windowsill. "You did all this," he said finally, the wonder in his voice unmistakable. "You really did?" I nodded. I did. He looked at me, then really looked not at the ghost of his wife, but at the woman in front of him in flour, dusted jeans, with a streak of chocolate on her cheek, her hair in a messy but practical bun, her posture straight and unapologetic. "It is amazing, Cat," he said. He swallowed. "I am so sorry for everything, for all of it, the pain I caused you. And the kids, I am truly sorry." The words hung in the air between us. I had dreamed of this moment for years, fantasized about his remorse now. That it was here, I felt a profound and surprising stillness. I looked at this man, who had been the sun in my solar system for so long, whose approval I had craved, whose departure had shattered me. I searched for the old love, the old hurt, the old anger. It was all there, but distant, filed away in the archives of my life. The apology was his to make, I said quietly. "But my life is not an apology anymore, Michael. It is a celebration." He flinched slightly. "But not it. I forgive you," I said. And I realized with a shock that I meant it not for him. But for me, the forgiveness was not an absolution of his actions. It was my own final release from carrying the weight of his choices. "I am not sorry," I continued, "not for the pain. No one would choose that fire. But I am not sorry for who the fire forged. I am not sorry for this life. For my children, for this." He looked down at his coffee cup, his knuckles white. Just then the back door burst open, and a whirlwind of adolescence entered. Liam with his headphones around his neck, Sophia, chattering about her team's robot design. They stopped short, seeing their father. "Hey, Dad." Liam said a casual greeting that spoke of 1,000 such exchanges. Sophia gave him a quick hug, then turned to me. "Mom, can I take one of the leftover lemon bars for the road?" "Of course, sweetie," I said, smiling. The normalcy of it, the easy flow between my world and the fact of him, was the greatest testament to my healing. They gathered their things and left with him, Sophia calling a goodbye over her shoulder, the bell jingling again. As the door closed, I watched them climb into his car, a different car than the one we had shared. He did not look back at the bakery. They drove away. I stood there for a long moment in the quiet of my shop. The late afternoon sun slanted through the window, illuminating motes of flour dancing in the air. I walked to the front door and flipped the open sign to closed. I did not feel empty or sad. I felt full. I returned to the back kitchen to my waiting ganache. I dipped a finger in tasting the rich, bitter sweetness. I looked at the wedding cake in progress, a beautiful, elegant thing for a couple just starting their story. My own story was different. It was not a fairy tale with a prince and a rescue. It was a myth of a different kind. The story of a woman who got lost in a forest of other people's expectations, who had to battle the monsters of her own insecurity and shame, who had to learn that her own two hands were capable of building not just a cake, but a life. It was the story of learning that a heart can break, and yet within the broken places, new chambers can form, capable of holding more compassion, more joy, more authentic love than ever before. I am Catherine Elizabeth Vance. Most people call me Cat. I am a baker, a mother, a daughter, a friend. I am a woman who wears a crown not of thunder anymore, but of sunlight earned slowly, minute by minute, choice by brave choice, in a small bakery on a side street, in a town I now call my own. This is not the story I was given. It is the story I chose to write from the ashes, and the taste of it is sweeter than any frosting I have ever crafted.